Aloha and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Got Your Six podcast. This six-question podcast brings together high performers to share their methods, strategies, and ideas, delivered in an informative and, most importantly, actionable way that'll help you lead yourself and those around you from the battlefield to the boardroom. Coming to you every episode, I'm your host, Tony Nash. And into the breach.
Nothing mentioned on this podcast is an endorsement or opinion of the Department of Defense.
I got your six, we got your back. Got your six, we got your back. Got your six, we got your back. I got your six.
Sixers, what an unbelievable treat we have today. We're talking to someone who is, you know what, I'm going to just go out there and say it. He's a legend in the Marine Corps. He's already shaking his head, so this is great. We have Sam Meek on, founder and CEO of Sandboxx. If you haven't heard of it, it is just an absolute awesome company. From recruiting a soldier into the military to retirement, Sandboxx completely supports your entire journey with communication, career content, lifestyle utilities. The list goes on and on. I mean, we might even dive in a little bit to Flywyld, which I know you're an avid aviator. But Sam, thank you so much for coming on the Got Your Six podcast today.
No, Tony, I appreciate it, man. And we all know that when you talk about a legend, it's just a massive lie with maybe a little kernel of truth.
Yeah. I told you we were going to sneak it in there. I just didn't know when we were going to do it.
Yeah.
As we talk about Sandboxx, what I find particularly fascinating is it's really people's first introduction to the military when they, recruits. And this is just a journey where a recruit goes into the military and their family and loved ones need to be able to communicate with them. And for the first time, they have this, almost barrier because of boot camp and stuff like that. How does Sandboxx kind of fit into all this with what you and the team are doing with communication and how that, serves a service member through their lifetime?
No, well, I appreciate you asking the question, Tony. And before I dive into Sandboxx, I just wanted to take a moment to, address you and your Sixers and tell you how much I love what you're doing and what you're creating. It is making an incredible amount of difference for our veteran entrepreneurs and folks that are transitioning and thinking about their next chapter. And I know, the one thing that's always helped me in my individual path, from transitioning into entrepreneurship has been listening to other people's stories. So thank you for telling them.
I appreciate that.
And on the Sandboxx front, it's really a pretty remarkable thing that we've stumbled on, and the opportunity to continue to do great things for our military and their families in a really neat way at scale. I have to say that I feel really blessed to have a remarkable team around me, a great group of investors, a wonderful board of directors that are laser focused on a North Star, which is pretty simple. And we get to build content and technology to help simplify the military journey. That's a mouthful of a statement. And I think when you think about it, we're kind of talking about boiling the ocean here. And so, as we think about how do you effectively create a platform that services the military community, the military family, and the DoD and the institution at large, how do you do that, at scale, and how do you do it successfully? And, I think the one thing that we figured out is you've got to fundamentally break down your product strategy and your growth strategy into, these individual things and experiments that, help our service members and their families and the DoD be more successful through these friction points that happen. And you're very versed in the friction points that exist along the military journey, and anyone who's been fortunate enough to serve also understands those. And those friction points start at the very beginning of, I'm thinking about joining the military, and, they really don't go away, even after we transition to veteran lifestyle. There's just so much there, associated with the military journey. But we recognize that if we were going to create a platform that could truly help our service community be successful in the long term, we'd have to start at the beginning of the military journey. We'd have to start with recruiting. We'd have to start with basic training and, that first year of service. So for us, the two big aha moments, as we launched the apps in 2015 were around the knowledge transfer that we saw to be so critical within the delayed entry program and the recruiting phase, as well as the disconnectivity that happens when you ship off the basic training. And so on the knowledge front, there are so many places out there that have good information, decent information, and just information that's completely wrong. And so we wanted to figure out a way to segment this information and better understand how to deliver this information in a relevant and kind of snackable way for those 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-olds that are joining our Department of Defense today. And it's much different. Every year things are changing in the way they consume the content and what really helps them make better decisions. But we recognize that it's got to be mobile. It's got to be SMS driven. It's got to be in-app push notification. It's got to be video. It's got to be short and long form content depending on what you're delivering. It's got to be measurable. You've got to be able to think about the difference between what a Navy mom wants versus what that young future soldier who's waiting to ship off to Fort Jackson needs.
Right.
And the team has done an incredible job at thinking about how do you segment the content, how do you create the content and deliver that and measure it to find success. And so, anyone that's thinking about joining the military today, as they're searching for what it means to be a soldier or what to expect at Fort Leonard Wood, or, what happens when I get to my MOS school, hopefully, a lot of the content that comes up via Google is going to be some Sandboxx content. And so that's one of the first things that we focus on is how do we begin to think about our acquisition model that's really a positive spin on the way this next generation of warfighter is trying to figure out their journey.
And so, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and so that's one side of the house. And then that other piece that I mentioned, the letters platform, we've become so accustomed to communicating mobily as well as our friends and family around us, to us. And when, Tony drops off the grid and, is doing Beast Week at West Point or going through, training week 4 at Fort Sill, that disconnectivity is a real thing for you and for your mom and, buddies on your football team, whatever the case may be. And so the letters platform was just a really easy way for loved ones to be able to stay connected and vice versa. And how do you merge the digital and the mail call analog side of the house?
As we look at communication, especially, and I'm sure you can apply. This might even be what you implement daily from your time in the Marine Corps. Being able to communicate efficiently, and you talked about looking at your audience is different across depending on who you're talking about. But being able to get that digestible content delivered to them, is that something that you remember from your time in service where being able to communicate effectively was just what you kind of carried with you? Or was there something else that has helped driven, what you and the team at Sandboxx have created?
Yeah, I mean, obviously effective communication is a pillar of success in the military. And we've had the good fortune of serving with and around really good communicators, and we've had the poor fortune of serving and working with really bad communicators. And we try and take the good and leave the bad. And so, when you think about concise communication and you think about the adoption curve and how we change behavior and how we make decisions, some people can hear something once and they can get it done. They can figure it out. And some folks need to hear it from a specific channel, or it needs to be embedded, 7 or 8 times in a variety of ways. And so, I think that there's a mix there. There's what we've seen in the marketplace for, successful growth of blogs or media businesses and the way they communicate and they share information. And then you also, have the individual experiences that, we've seen of, when I showed up at that unit, I had a platoon sergeant who really cared about a whiteboard and sitting down every day and making sure that everybody understood who was doing what and how and what success looked like. And so taking kind of the best of both worlds and, the media side of the house and digital delivery to, where we saw success with really good communicators in the military, I think has been a cornerstone of the way we think about our product strategy.
First off, we got to shout out who your squad leader was at the time. Do you remember?
Well, I mean, I had lots of squad leaders.
The whiteboard one
I'll say one.
specifically.
I had an MOS school. We had Sergeant Amos was our platoon sergeant, and I just remember he would be hanging out in the barracks until 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, just shooting the shit with us. And back then I always thought, man, what a cool like sergeant, just hanging out with these nobody PFCs, really caring about who we are and how we think of success in our own military journey. And I now kind of unpack it and play it back, and I recognize that he was just consistently reinforcing the message of what it meant to be a good student and what success looked like in just an incredible way. Yeah, he's someone that has really touched me personally. As I continue on in my military experience.
And as we look at being essentially a lifelong learner, where are you currently looking to develop your skill sets? I mean, especially being in the communication world and the media world, things are ever changing, like you've already mentioned. Is there a particular thing that you've seen kind of that's coming in the future that you're like, oh, this is going to be pretty huge?
Yeah, well, there's a lots of tools and platforms out there that I think are interesting, but where I honestly get most of my learning today is actually from my teammates. We've got so many really smart, lifelong learning folks in Sandboxx that are consistently bringing new ideas to the table, and it's new processes, it's new thought leadership around experimenting with a style or a specific platform, changing the way we might measure something, challenging assumptions in a really thoughtful way that's productive to the organization. So I have to say, our team is really for me where I get most of my personal growth today.
Do you have a particular example, maybe whether it be in the thought leadership or like measuring, that you've recently kind of come across from your teammates that you're just like, this is just interesting? And
yeah,
actually fascinating.
We've got our director of marketing, Jeremiah. He's got a crazy cool background in marketing, and one of the things that we've always tried to figure out is what are some of the kind of core KPIs that we consistently have to measure, and then as we think about how do we iterate on that, and where can we think about better performance and better metrics. One of the things that he's brought to the table, and it's kind of rudimentary, but something that we really weren't thinking about in the right way was something called time to value, and it's pretty simple. It's how much time occurs between when someone joins your platform to when they receive value. And in our case, like let's take the letters business for example. A lot of folks will sign up for Sandboxx because they have a loved one that is going to basic training or has just shipped off to basic training, and sometimes they'll wait 5, 6, 7 days before sending their first letter, because they want to read up on the content, or they're waiting just for a little more nudge to actually send that first letter. And we started thinking about, okay, how do we kind of pull that forward a little bit and think about what that time to value looks like. And so it was very thoughtful experimentation around what does the SMS have to say, how many emails and when are they delivered, what type of push notifications, what type of content are we going to deliver to that Navy mom who is a big Facebook user, and what are we going to drop into her Facebook feed versus the Army dad who's like, I don't do social, I barely do text messages. How do we
a flip phone and like punches in each letter?
So it has the hello moto. There's definitely a lot of difference in digital behavior, and as we think about our product strategy and how we basically shrink that time to value. He's brought a lot of really great ideas forward that we've executed on, and we've moved that needle, considerably, and it's had a big impact on, the bottom line, but more importantly, it's had a big impact in, the happiness of, our new military community, because we've focused on that value generation faster.
Would you say, as you've kind of gone more into as you've gone into the entrepreneur space, coming out of the Marine Corps, understanding how the customer as well as your team seeks and understands happiness has been the thing that has most improved overall. Not like you said, like the bottom line, that's great, but like your productivity, your ability to get people to buy into what you're doing? Or is there something else that you've been able to kind of tap into and be like, this is the thing I always look for whenever I'm recruiting somebody to the team or we're talking about Sandboxx or whatever it may be?
Well, yeah, Tony, that's a great question. I think one of the coolest things that I get to see is when we have folks that come into our recruiting pipeline. And by the way, little shameless shout out. We're looking for an Android engineer. So how'd
We'll
you
make
get
sure we
in touch?
include that in the show notes as well.
Yeah,
Not to
yeah,
worry.
we'd love to find an Android engineer. It's a tough market, but you know we get a lot of folks that seek service, that have never served in the military, and a lot of folks just never even considered service just because it wasn't part of their bailiwick, part of their upbringing. And when we get to talk to people about what we're doing, it consistently comes up as, hey, I never served in the military, and I don't understand the military journey, so I don't know if I'm going to be a good fit. But what very quickly follows is, this is really cool, and I think I could really get invested in this because I never had the opportunity to serve, and this may be a way for me to get that feeling, for me to have an impact on our military community in a way that they've never been able to accomplish before. And so, all of my teammates, whether they're veterans, military spouses, or brats, or folks that have never touched the military community, but especially those that have never been around the military community, feel like they're doing some sort of service in a really neat way. And it's an incredible recruiting tool. It's an incredible retention tool. And it really, rallies around our North Star. So I think that's one of our secret weapons as we think about our people.
No, absolutely. And it's extremely powerful too, because you're allowing people not to self-select, because you're making it, their choice, and understanding like, we recognize you haven't done this, and that's okay. You still have so much value to add because of your background. And this is still a way to serve other people who are serving. I think that's just incredibly powerful.
If we had just hired a bunch of Marines, we'd just be sitting around a table eating red crayons until the cows come home.
You said it, not me. As we look though on the entrepreneur journey, which is, lifelong, along the way, there's always successes and super massive highs, but there's always absolutely like almost rock bottom lows. Where have you just absolutely like crashed and burned, to give it, a flight analogy, but been able to kind of soar up from that along the way, whether it be in the Marine Corps or after in, the civilian sector?
Yeah, God, I'll tell you, I would say that the entrepreneurship journey is defined by mistakes. And, I personally, and we as an organization, have made lots of them. And, I'm fairly certain, based on track records, we got plenty more mistakes to go. And it's cheeky, but it's really how you kind of recover. And I think as you have the opportunity to work with teams and grow businesses, you figure out how to pivot very quickly and respond and look at kind of the positive nature on what's going forward, but be very thoughtful in retrospective to figure out, okay, where did we go wrong in an assumption, or how had that mistake occur? And we try to be very thoughtful about the way we look at retros, but also knowing that, hey, that didn't work, and we're going to charge forward. I mean, we recently, we're working on some new product strategy right now. We recently spent, probably the better part of a month, maybe even longer, on trying to figure out the best avenue to approach this new product strategy. We spent a bunch of money and time in a very specific direction, and it was something we all talked about. But there were some some decisions that were made that didn't quite add up, and we pretty quickly got together and said, hey, boys and girls, we're going down the wrong road here. Let's make a pivot, and let's not worry about what happened. Let's charge forward. Let's understand why we made the decisions we made. But let's not harp on it, and let's learn from this and go. And the faster you can get to those discussions, and the faster you can allow your teammates to be vulnerable in, in those mistakes as well as in the successes, I think the better off you can be. So there's countless, mistakes. I mean, not having enough money in the bank and not being able to kind of, foresee those issues, to, hiring the wrong people, or hiring the right people at the wrong time. Lots of that stuff, platform selection, vendor selection, organizational, stuff, processes, people, processes, systems, lots of that stuff. And you learn, you read, you talk and network around, the things you're trying to accomplish. And I find that, the best advice that I get is from, not the folks that built, media businesses or platforms or apps, 5 years ago, or even 3 years ago, but the folks that are, half a step in front of me, and maybe a year in front of our growth trajectory. We learn so much from the people that are just a little bit ahead of us, in other organizations. And so, we consistently try and lean on, we've got, folks on the product team that, have product mentors that are at organizations that are just a little bit bigger than ours. I've got friends of mine that are CEOs in companies that are just a little bit bigger. And, they're at that next fundraise, or they're at that next kind of growth inflection point. And, I'm learning about, the mistakes that they made, and trying to avoid those booby traps. So it's kind of a mix of the landscape, but there's many of them out there. And it's just the quicker you can pivot and move forward is the answer. And surrounding yourself with the right people to do it.
I think you touch on something extremely special there when you talk about the product mentorship, because it's not a formal process. At least I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's an informal process where it's just that conversation, and it allows for essentially internal and external, like after action reviews in the moment to occur. So you can continue that climate and culture of trust and vulnerability that exists inside the organization, but being able to reach out and to say, hey, this is kind of what we're doing. It's not really working. Do we have any feedback? And creating a network of other people that are more than willing to just give you what their thoughts are unbiasedly. I think that is extremely powerful.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
And so how did you kind of come across that? Or was it just, like we said, just a natural thing that happened as you guys started to grow, even from the very beginning?
I would say it definitely has felt much more organic than anything else. And that's, in my opinion, really because, we've had, my co-founder Swami, he's just an incredible bleeding heart of this organization. He's got so much, like, the way his like emotional tentacles move through Sandboxx is incredible. And, he can pick up, the slightest, movement in the emotional intelligence of the organization miles away, and meanwhile, by the time it gets to me, it's like a glaring problem. I'm like, oh, well, let's focus on that now. And he's so good at kind of, reading the room and thinking about, is the organization healthy? Are people being taken care of? And how do we do that? And Shane, who's our CMO, he's been with us, since the beginning. He has always challenged us to try new things and think about experimentation. And he's either kind of let's go full speed ahead, or putting the reins back on Swami and I, saying, hey, let's talk about this a little bit before we make a decision. And I find that having these a diversity of thought in the way that we've built Sandboxx, and that emotional intelligence has kind of organically enabled all that to happen for us.
And it's awesome to see that when it does occur, because it's organic, you can't really control it. But and it's one of those things that's hard to describe, because you're being able to take in all these things, and everything's moving at once. And like you said, by the time it gets to you, it's so glaring, because you're able to leverage everyone else's skill sets in a way that just helps not only individuals, but the overall organization grow.
Right.
So, Sam, as we kind of come up on the end of the episode, we've touched on so much, from emotional intelligence to being a lifelong learner. I have to ask you one final question. Sam Meek, how are you better today than yesterday?
Oh man, I'm better today than yesterday. That's a really easy answer. I was in Florida last night. I had the wonderful opportunity to meet a recently retired admiral to think and talk through some of the Sandboxx strategy, and I got back tonight and I had the opportunity to put my son to bed. And so I am better today because I had the opportunity to put Oliver to bed and read him a couple books.
What was the story tonight?
So it was Jack Builds a House. We read that one. We read another book called Over and Over, which is a beautiful book about the day in love. And we read this really funny book. I don't know the name of the book, but it's like Don't Touch the Button. And it's literally page by page of like, don't touch the button. But you got to touch the button, of course, right?
Yeah.
Things happen on each page as you touch the button. And Oliver he is in stitches about, getting through that book.
That is awesome. And that makes it all worth it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Sam, where can people go to find more about Sandboxx, you, and everything else that you guys are creating across the digital landscape?
No, appreciate that, Tony. Just throw Sandboxx with 2 X's into the Google machine. You'll find us. We've got a wonderful presence on the web. We're building out all sorts of new functionality to focus on life after basic training. We've got a really neat product called Muster coming out. That's kind of like a Slack for the military community. That's right now we're hyper focused on helping our recruiters do their job more successfully and help that delayed entry program with attrition and the network around the Future Soldier program. And so, all that stuff, you're going to start to see a lot more Sandboxx outside of just recruiting and basic training, but into that active duty life cycle. If anyone ever wants to get in touch with me, you can, on Sandboxx in the app, you can reach out to our customer happiness team with anything. And they send me stuff all the time. So that's usually the best way to get to me is just directly through Sandboxx. And, I love helping, our military members and spouses and our veterans that are interested in the entrepreneurship journey. So I asked everyone to reach out, and I'm happy to opine.
And we will make sure we link for both Android and Apple users to the app, which is just absolutely beautifully designed.
Oh, thanks. Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Tony.
Sam, thank you for taking the time, sharing your strategies, your methods, your tactics, and most importantly, thanks for having our 6. Really appreciate it.
Every time.
I don't know what you've been told, Sixers, but the lawyers would like us to remind you that the views, opinions, and comments expressed on the Got Your 6 podcast are solely those of the hosts or guests, to include current and previous Department of Defense employees, and should in no way be considered the opinions of or endorsements on behalf of the Department of Defense or any of its components, divisions, contractors, or other current and previous staff members.